What if India launched a full-scale invasion of China and won? Could the world's two most populous nations survive such a catastrophic war? What would life look like for the people of China under Indian rule? And how would this reshape global power forever? Let's examine why this might happen, how it could unfold, and what the consequences would be for India, China, and the rest of the world. Section 1. Why would India invade China? India and China share one of the most complex relationships in global politics, marked by cooperation in trade, but also deep-seated tensions. The two nations are locked in an ongoing border dispute over territories in the Himalayas, including Arunachal Pradesh and Aksai Chin. Now imagine a future where these disputes escalate. Perhaps China increases its military presence along the border, or India retaliates after another violent skirmish in the mountains. Tensions spiral out of control, and New Delhi decides it can no longer tolerate Beijing's growing influence in South Asia. There's also the matter of competition. Both India and China are vying to become the dominant power in Asia. India, with its growing economy and population, might see a future where China's rise threatens its ambitions. Faced with an aggressive neighbour and a chance to reshape the regional balance of power, India could decide to strike first. But let's not underestimate the scale of this. China's military is larger, its economy is stronger, and its infrastructure is far more developed. The idea of India successfully invading China might sound impossible. So how could it even begin? Section 2. How the war might unfold. An Indian invasion of China would face enormous challenges from the start. Geographically, the Himalayan mountains form a nearly impassable barrier between the two countries. Any ground invasion would require immense logistical planning, with troops and equipment moving through narrow, high-altitude passes under the constant threat of Chinese retaliation. India's first moves would likely involve securing key territories in the disputed border regions, such as Aksai Chin and Tibet. These areas are sparsely populated, but strategically vital, serving as gateways to China's interior. Meanwhile, India's navy would play a crucial role in the Indian Ocean, targeting Chinese shipping routes and cutting off its access to vital resources. This naval blockade could cripple China's economy, forcing Beijing to divert resources away from the ground war. The air war would be equally critical. India would need to use its advanced fighter jets and missile systems to strike key Chinese military installations, particularly in Tibet and southern China. Major cities like Chengdu and Kunming, close to the border, could become prime targets. But even if India made initial gains, it would face an uphill battle. China's military, the People's Liberation Army, is larger and better equipped, with over 2 million active personnel and advanced technology. The sheer scale of China's population and resources would make a full conquest nearly impossible. Still, in this scenario, let's imagine that India manages to achieve the unthinkable: the collapse of the Chinese government and control over its territory. Section 3. Life under Indian rule. So, what would life look like for the people of China under Indian rule? For the Chinese population, such an occupation would be nothing short of a seismic shift. The Communist Party of China would collapse, replaced by Indian-backed leadership or direct Indian administration. While India's democratic values might bring some initial hope for reform, the reality of occupation would likely be far more complex. First, let's talk about governance. China's immense population, over 1.4 billion people, would pose a logistical nightmare for India. Maintaining control over such a vast and diverse nation would require significant resources and manpower. Regions like Tibet, already resistant to Chinese rule, could see renewed independence movements, further complicating India's efforts to govern. Economically, India might attempt to integrate China's advanced industries and technology into its own economy. This could create opportunities for growth, but also lead to resentment among Chinese citizens, who may see their resources and infrastructure being exploited for India's benefit. Factories in Shenzhen and Shanghai could be repurposed to serve Indian corporations, but at what cost to the local population? Socially and culturally, tensions would run high. While India and China share some historical ties, their cultural differences are stark. Attempts to impose Indian governance or integrate Indian culture into Chinese society would likely be met with resistance. Censorship, surveillance, and crackdowns on protests could become commonplace as India struggles to maintain order. For ordinary Chinese citizens, life under Indian rule might mean reduced freedoms, economic instability, and a constant undercurrent of unrest. And for the Indian people, the costs of occupation, both financial and human, would be immense. Section 4. The global consequences. The impact of an Indian victory over China wouldn't just be felt in Asia, it would send shockwaves across the world. First, let's consider the global economy. China is the world's largest manufacturer and a critical player in global trade. A war of this scale would disrupt supply chains for everything from electronics to pharmaceuticals, plunging the global economy into chaos. An Indian-controlled China might attempt to stabilize production, but the damage would already be done. Politically, the balance of power would shift dramatically. India would emerge as the dominant power in Asia, eclipsing not only China, but also other regional players like Japan and South Korea. This new dominance would likely bring India into direct competition with the United States, which has traditionally seen itself as the primary global superpower. But the risks wouldn't end there. Other nations might take advantage of the chaos to expand their own influence. Russia, for example, could move to reclaim parts of Central Asia, while nations like Pakistan and Turkey might try to destabilize India's hold over China by supporting insurgent movements. And then there's the question of alliances. Would the USA and Europe support India's control over China, or would they see it as a threat to global stability? Could this lead to new rivalries, or even spark another Cold War? Section 5. Final thoughts and call to action. This scenario is bold, complex, and filled with unanswered questions. Could India realistically invade and conquer China? Would the costs of such a war outweigh any potential gains? And what would life be like for the billions of people caught in the aftermath? What do you think? Is this a plausible future or just a fascinating hypothetical? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy exploring provocative scenarios like this, make sure to subscribe to What Would Happen If for more in-depth looks at the world's most intriguing what-if questions. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.